Right, so hi everyone, thanks for joining. Welcome to the first session of this year's Solve a City. This week's theme is waste in Kathmandu, and our guest speaker is Topaz. She's currently a fifth year engineering design student here at Bristol, and she did a year in industry in Kathmandu. So we're kind of gonna go right into it. And yeah, I'm gonna pass it straight to you. And yes, we're recording, so that's great.
Cool. Hi, everyone. Just see if I can share my screen. Is that sharing a PowerPoint slide?
Yes.
Great. Cool. So hi, everyone. Welcome to this talk about waste in Kathmandu. I hope it proves interesting. It's certainly a really complex topic, really something with a lot of factors to consider. So I'm going to do my best to give an overview of the challenges involved, and hopefully it will prove interesting. So first of all, I'm going to introduce you all to Kathmandu as a city. Understanding the context is perhaps the most important part of doing any kind of work in an international context. And then I'm going to go over some of the challenges of solid waste management in Kathmandu. And then I'm going to talk about 3 key international projects that aimed to address solid waste management in Kathmandu and why they didn't really have an impact, and what we can learn from those projects. So Kathmandu is the capital of Nepal, which is a small country wedged between India and China. And it is situated on the Himalayan mountain range. But at the lowest point, it's really almost at sea level. So it's got a very dynamic and very varying climate, even though it's such a small country. The city itself has a population of about 1.5 million, but it's also the 6th most densely populated city in the world. On top of which it's very high up. It's 1.5 thousand meters above sea level. So this gives it a very unique sort of, it's quite a unique city, and the physical constraints are going to be really important. So here are just some pictures of Kathmandu. So as you can see, it's a very colorful place. There's a lot going on day to day. There's a lot of different groups of people. There's a lot of different types of architecture. There's a lot of cows wandering around. Cows are sacred. So it's a very rich place, but this adds complexity in terms of looking at waste, which we'll see soon. So I thought it was worth mentioning about the geography. So many of you will have will know Kathmandu notably for the effects of the 2015 earthquake, which are still being dealt with today. There's still a lot of the city which is hasn't been rebuilt since then, but it is something that greatly affects Nepal. Fairly regularly, every 80 years, a really big earthquake will hit because of the seismic activity from the Himalayan range. So that's another factor to consider when we think about Kathmandu. And those, the damage of that earthquake is still being felt by the people. So yeah, one more thing, Kathmandu is situated in a valley. So it's got steep hills on all sides. There's a picture down here on the bottom right, where you can see those hills circling the city. That is a very unique challenge because in terms of supplying the city or taking something like waste out of the city, you are physically constrained by the size of the valley. And then you've got 2 roads, only 2 like big roads leading out of that valley if you want to get out of it, which is, again, quite a constraint to think about. So a note about the culture of Kathmandu. I could spend a very long time talking about this, but I'm just going to be brief. It is a complete mixing pot of different peoples, different ethnicities, and each with their own language, culture, religion, beliefs, festivals, all kinds of things. It's a very unique thing about Kathmandu. It feels very different from many other cities in the world because of this mixed nature. But it also means that we have to think about the different perspectives of people when we approach any kind of problem and thinking of a solution to it. So something I'm going to mention briefly is caste, which is worth thinking about. Caste is the Hindu hierarchical system, which originated as a means of categorizing people according to the division of labor, roles, and functions. In Nepal, there are 4 main caste groups with upper castes and lower castes. But it's very easy to correlate caste and inequality in the country. So something that will come up when we talk about waste is that many of the people who are involved with waste are usually from the Dalit caste, so the lowest castes. But the people who are making the decisions are usually from upper castes who don't really know what's going on the ground. So certainly it has a really important impact on the city, the fabric of the city. Okay, so coming to solid waste management in Kathmandu, what does it look like? Something like this. So as you can see, quite different from the waste management system in a city like Bristol, for example. So Kathmandu has 35 wards, and each independently manages collection and disposal of waste. There are many different actors involved in this system. As you can imagine, 1.5 million people, it's quite a task. The way that it historically worked was people would choose in the different communities would choose an area like part of a courtyard where everyone would leave their waste. And then it is the role of the kuchikars, who are people whose historically have been involved in waste collection. It is their role to collect that mixed waste and then bring it to the river, bring it to an open place and just leave it there. And historically, that was okay because there wasn't that many people in the valley and most of that waste was organic, so it would naturally biodegrade. However, now, when there's so much plastic involved now, and there's so many people, the population of Kathmandu has completely exploded, that system doesn't really work. And you can see some pictures here of, well, the bottom right being the most sort of drastic, but that is the Bagmati River running through Kathmandu. So pollution is a huge problem. Plastic waste is degrading into the environment. Open dumping and open burning just can't do it, can't handle the volumes of waste that the city is seeing. So I mentioned briefly that caste was important. The Kuchikars, who have historically managed the system, are mostly from Pode, Chame, and Halahulu castes, which are Dalit lower castes. So many in the city will see waste management as the job of these people, and that has an impact on where people perceive responsibility to lie. Okay, so I'm going to whistle through what I think are the 5 key challenges. So first of all, we've mentioned that Kathmandu is in a valley, right? So this picture is possibly not the best picture, but in orange or sort of beige, you can see that's the urban area. And the squares, the black squares and the blue square and the blue circle are the active and closed dumps in and around the city. Basically, there just isn't enough place that's been allocated to leave garbage, whether that's a dump or a landfill. Most of them have been closed or are overflowing. And because it's a valley and there's only 2 roads going out, you know, no one wants a dump in their backyard, but you're in a valley, so you can't just, there's only so far you could go to dump waste before you have to take the road going out of the valley, which is its whole problem. Secondly, a lack of waste infrastructure and segregation. So with any waste system, what you really want is to segregate your waste from the household level and then separately take them and deal with them each separately. So Bristol does this amazingly well. We have our food waste bins separate. And what that means is that the food waste, which is wet, cannot contaminate any of the other waste, which might be very valuable, such as plastic, which can then be recycled. Kathmandu doesn't have any segregation throughout the system at the moment. So most of the waste is dumped all together. So the food waste will contaminate all the others and they can then not really be recycled unless people go through by hand and pick them out, which is unsanitary and also unsafe. You think glass shards getting in there, all of it ending up in the environment somehow. So that's a real issue. Something else to mention, most of the waste is organic, coming out of households, which could be a good thing if there was the infrastructure to take organic waste from the household level, transport it to a composting facility, and then make sure that it was properly composted. That doesn't, there have been challenges involved in trying to get that to happen. It has been attempted. But right now what it means is you get organic waste on the street, gathering up there, and then you get rodents coming in on the street. It smells really bad. It contaminates all the other recyclates. So lack of dealing with organic waste is a big problem when there's so much of it. And finally, another key challenge for the waste infrastructure of Kathmandu is that most of the people involved with waste are informal workers. That means they do not have full rights because they're working off the books. It means most of the time they're operating in unsanitary and unsafe conditions. And it means that many of these people, they can't improve their situation and they're stuck in a poverty cycle. So yes, it's a big problem. And something else you might be able to see, these pictures are really tiny, I realize that now, but many of the people involved with waste picking, so sorting through the mixed rubbish, looking for recyclable stuff, most of them are women, most of them are from very low castes. So it all ties together with that cultural fabric of the city, and it's really important to consider the intersection of caste and gender. Okay, so finally, I'm going to talk about 3 attempts by 3 different countries to help provide assistance to Kathmandu to improve solid waste management, and why all 3 of them had their flaws. So in 1978, between 1978 and 1993, there was a German project to help improve solid waste management in Kathmandu. It happened in 4 phases. So this is just a summary. I mean, they tried to do quite a lot in that time, but I'm just going to run through some of the most important things. So first of all, they set up a new landfill site. Sounds great, right? I've just mentioned there's not enough places to actually safely leave waste. Well, the Gokona landfill site was supposed to last 200 years and it only lasted around 10. So that was a lot of mismanagement happened there. And one of the biggest problems was leachate, so toxic wastes that was running out of the landfill into the river, into the environment. It's hazardous, it smells bad, it is a toxic pollutant. And because of that leachate, the Gokona landfill site had to be closed early. There was huge public outcry, so that didn't go very well. Something else, with German assistance, they tried to set up a composting plant at a place called Teku, which is just on the outskirts of the city. Again, sounds great. We've already mentioned there's lots of organic waste, so a need to get rid of that organic waste is really vital. However, that compost plant was also closed early. It also only lasted about 10 years. That was for similar reasons. The people near to Teku were very angry about it there. There were problems of odor. There were problems with leachate again, and it just wasn't managed correctly. If you want to deal with compost, you need to make sure that you're turning it many times, you're aerating the compost so that it actually biodegrades, and that wasn't happening. So it wasn't fulfilling its function as a compost plant, and a lot of people were very angry and it had to close. The third thing the Germans did was donate a bunch of equipment. So pictured here is a compressor, which is supposed to compress your landfill so that you can, compact it into the smallest space possible. They donated all this bulky equipment. However, in Kathmandu, because so much of the waste is organic, it's already naturally compressed by the time it gets to landfill. So they actually have never used, for example, that landfill compactor and much of the other equipment that was donated. So was that an effective spend of money? Probably not. And finally, the Germans set up this body called the Solid Waste Management and Resource Mobilization Center, which was meant to help oversee solid waste management throughout the city and help bring all the different actors together. But that's not what happened. All that happened was that it added a layer of bureaucracy. It actually decreased communication. And as soon as the Germans left, there were huge problems because most of the staff were paid much higher than could be afforded by the Nepali government. So as a result, in conclusion of this, this project, there was a failure to involve the kuchikars and the informal waste workers and all of the actors involved. There was a failure to involve important institutions. It focused on technology, but then didn't get it right. So that bulky equipment, not very helpful. However, landfill site could have been helpful, but it didn't go right. So in the end, it only added more strain. And when the Germans left, there were even more problems because they took their funding with them. So it wasn't a very long-term project in the end. As soon as the Germans left, the Indian government donated a bunch of equipment to Kathmandu. That's kind of all they did, just a one-off. But again, the same problem happened. So this on the left is a street jet washer, I think. It's meant to clean streets. That's what one of them typically looks like. That's about the size. And on the right is a picture of a typical street in Kathmandu. So you can see why none of that equipment ended up being all that helpful. And actually, Kathmandu went back to their normal system, which is they have just manual people sweeping the streets by hand. But it works because the streets are so small and you can't get these big machines in. So with this project, what went wrong was that the people making the decisions and accepting the aid were the people in the government, maybe usually higher caste, upper caste people, who don't actually know the realities of what it's like to manage waste on the ground. And there was that gap between the people making the decisions and the people who are actually doing the work. So that was another example of a faulty project. And finally, between 2004 and 2007, the Japanese came in to try and assist with the solid waste management again. And this project, whilst on paper looks like it might have been more helpful, it did have a whole phase that focused on education and training. However, the people who were trained were the sort of managers and policy level people. And that didn't filter down through to the kuchikars on the ground, the informal workers on the ground. So that was problematic. There was also serious problems that are ongoing to this day with landfill chaos. So there was one landfill that was operating and was supposed to close. It was temporary, supposed to close in 2009. And it had to reopen because the new landfill was never built, or it's still under construction. It's been under construction for over a decade. So there's a lot of failures of the state to organize themselves and get that landfill sorted, which the Japanese couldn't do very much about. They also donated more equipment that ended up being useless because it was too complex and costly. And they instigated a public awareness program. But that program was quite flawed as well because it looked at perceptions of waste just as perceptions of waste. But as I've tried to explain throughout this presentation, the Nepali perception of waste is not just waste, it's also integrated into perceptions of where responsibility lie, whose job it is to look after the streets, and of caste and of gender. So these are important to consider. So this project failed. Again, failure to involve kuchikars, informal waste workers, failure to deal with landfill issues, failure to strengthen institutions and government capacity in the long term. I'm so sorry, that was a lot of information in a short space of time. I promise I'm getting to the end. So in conclusion, to successfully think about solid waste in Kathmandu, a scheme should be simple and actually more labor intensive. So focus on that incredible resource, which is the kuchikars, working with their knowledge, not thinking too much about big bulky technology, because that just isn't the right solution here. Smaller NGOs, there's quite a few of them. They can help organize house-to-house level work and strengthen existing relations. So formalize and involve the informal sector. This is so important. There are so many people who are living and working in unsafe conditions. Helping those people and also relying on their skills and helping them improve their lives with training, that's going to be really important. And also landfills need to be dealt with. So they should be carefully planned with consent. There shouldn't be any leachate. And as much as possible, the whole system should be improved so that less has to go to landfill in the first place. I think I've said most of these, but I'll just quickly summarize. Kathmandu is physically constrained and is lacking much of the necessary infrastructure. For any project, local buy-in and involvement at every stage is vital to the success of the project. It's vital to consider the intersect of caste and gender. Technology alone is not the solution, and any project needs to strengthen the whole system and think about education and minimize dependence on foreign aid so that if that aid is then pulled, it's all right, the system needs to be able to continue without it. So thank you. I'm sorry, that was a lot of information in one, but